Hello there, Gublick here. What you're about to see is an incomplete cut of why Sonic R is the best Sonic racing game, a video I started in around late 2022 and never finished. It was in development hell for quite a while, and I took an extended break from editing it. When I came back, I found myself very unhappy with it and never completed the video. Despite that, I thought it would be worth sharing with you all, since I did put many hours into it, and I think a lot of you would enjoy it and like to see it archived. With that said, I hope you enjoy it. This is still using my very old microphone. I sound very different in this video, and it definitely shows its age. You can tell it's a good couple years old. This video was originally going to launch my Sonic channel, which never came to be. I thought it'd be better to just put everything on my main channel, which, over the last few years I've started slowly uploading more Sonic content to that. But yeah, I hope you all enjoy. Let's just roll the video.
Yep, you read that title correctly. Sonic R is the best Sonic racing game. Even after the release of this, and even this, Sonic R is still the best racing game in the franchise. But why, you may ask? Isn't Sonic R that weird, clunky racing game that came out on a dead-on-arrival console? Isn't Sonic R that bizarre game that spawned many creepypastas? Isn't Sonic R that uncanny game with the funky soundtrack? Well, yes to all three of those questions. A lot of people will put this game down and write it off as a weird oddity that came out in a time when the franchise was starting to decline in popularity and Sega lost touch with the gaming landscape. But this game is so much more than that. Sonic R has so much untapped potential, so many interesting and creative gameplay mechanics that I think are more than worth discussing almost 25 years after its release. But before we can get into any of that, we need to first discuss how this interesting game came into existence. Sonic R began development in the distant year of 1996 by the studio we all know as Traveller's Tales, fresh off the heels of developing Sonic 3D Blast. Some may recognize them as the developers of pretty much every LEGO game since 2005, or maybe even as the company which kept Crash Bandicoot alive in the early 2000s. But before that, they were doing the same for Sonic in the mid to late 90s. Initially, this project wasn't even using the Sonic license, with being a Formula 1 racer to be published by Sega. From what's been said from interviews and the like, it seemed as though this game was going along smoothly. However, with the cancellation of the then newest mainline Sonic game, Sonic X-treme, Sega demanded that this Formula 1 game be adapted into a new Sonic game with the tight release deadline of Christmas 1997. Sonic Team themselves would also pitch in, designing and creating concept art for each level, with Traveller's Tales then bringing them to life. Months later, the game was revealed at E3 1997, and while I can't find much on the reception of the game at the time, there are many videos of this build of the game being played, as well as trailers created for this time period. According to developers, there were many scrap features and ideas, such as a mirror mode and a relay mode, the latter of which would have involved each lap being played by a different character. An extremely interesting idea due to how differently each character plays. Because of the extremely short development cycle for Sonic R, many of these ideas were cut for time, and also due to the technical limitations of the ill-fated Sega Saturn. One interesting note is that initially, many of the character models had a slightly larger polygon count, but this had to be downsized in order to maintain a more stable frame rate. So that little head tuft Tails has? Yeah, that had to go. However, in the PC version of the game, which would release 1 year later, the character models were overhauled and voila! Tails got his head tuft back! Before finally releasing in November of 1997, Sonic R's box art received a change, going from this very nice 2D art of Sonic and his friends, to this very late 90s looking render of Sonic and his friends. Although, the original box art still does appear in the game's credits. On release, Sonic R was met with mostly positive reviews, with critics primarily comparing the game to Mario Kart 64, which released just less than a year prior. While most reception was positive, the primary complaints that most seemed to have seemed to be the small amount of levels and the lack of some sort of story mode. But, overall, many who played the game on release were impressed with what they had played, praising the graphics, the amount of content available for both single-player and multiplayer sessions, and the sound design, with Dean Mortlock in a 1998 issue of the magazine Saturn Power saying, quote, The very heart of Sonic R is a powerful racing game that looks gorgeous, is fast, and smooth. Now, that on its own would be all very well and good, but it's the sheer depth of the game and the slowly rising difficulty level of the challenges that will keep you playing for the weeks to come. The highest recommendation I can make is that this is, quite simply, one of the finest Saturn games I've ever played. Now that we've delved into the development history of Sonic R and the initial praise it received at launch now in mind, let's jump ahead to the current day and take a look at how its reception has changed with the times. As Sega was being hit hard in the late 90s and early 2000s with the Saturn tanking in sales and the Dreamcast being slaughtered by the PlayStation 2, so too did the reputation of their most recognizable franchise. With the Sonic series being subject to many polarizing games during the 2000s which divided the fanbase, it became a common and easy joke to poke fun at the franchise's shortcomings. And joke people did, with many lists of the worst Sonic games ever made popping up over the years, and on said lists, Sonic R was often included.
To the left or the right, lacking completed textures or detail on its paltry selection of only 5 stages. Worst of all, you can complete this game 100% in less than an hour.
In almost every instance, these lists would rip the game to shreds, complaining about the controls, the music, etc, etc. Well, I'm here today to tell you that you've been lied to for all these years. Sonic R is actually really, really good, and it's aged better than you think. And it is, in my humble opinion, the best Sonic racing game, even to this day. With no exaggeration, Sonic R's levels are some of the most creative and branching racetracks ever put into a video game. While there are only 5 levels, Traveler's Tales and Sonic Team strongly prioritize quality over quantity when designing them. Every level is full of detail, collectibles, branching pathways and the like. It truly feels as though Sonic R's tracks were designed with the exact same level design philosophies used when creating the classic Genesis games, with there being many branching pathways that reward the player for going out of their way to explore and be creative while they traverse the landscape. Unlike other games of its genre, Sonic R isn't just a point A to point B racer, it greatly values the exploration aspect. Yeah, Mario Kart and Crash Team Racing have shortcuts, but are the levels this complex? Okay, maybe Crash Team Racing has like a couple levels that are like pretty complex, but you know, Sonic R is pretty unique in this aspect. Combine this with the fact that you've got a much wider moveset, being able to jump and make tighter turns, and you've got some very unique level design that would never work with any other control scheme. If you were to port over most of Sonic R's levels to any other kart racer, they would be a nightmare to traverse, due to the limited mobility of a vehicle, which tells you volumes about how this game's levels were designed. Resort Island introduces the player to the game with a relatively simple track with several beginner shortcuts to learn. It does a really good job showing the player how each major mechanic works, and my only complaint is just, does the opening level really need this much water? Radical City has 4 more optional pathways than the previous level, really introducing the concept that Sonic R's tracks will branch out and aren't afraid of being much more complex than your average racer. Due to how open parts of Radical City are, you can perform some major skips as characters like Tails and Knuckles that'll bypass major parts of the level, just another part of this game's satisfying skill ceiling. Regal Ruin steps it up a notch with even more complex level design and multiple routes that one must take in order to obtain each collectible. There's many areas with wide open spaces filled with water which encourage experimentation with each character. The only complaint I have with this level would be that of the Chaos Emeralds, as collecting them can require some precise movement, which if performed incorrectly can greatly hinder your chances of winning the race. Besides that, however, Regal Ruin is still one of the most engaging levels of the game, as it requires you to carefully decide which route you wish to prioritize, in order to obtain each collectible and still win the race. Reactor Factory is easily the hardest level in the game. It's got a lot of alternate routes, side areas for collectibles, tricky shortcuts, and the works. Trying to get both emeralds and the tokens in the same run is extremely difficult unless you planned accordingly, know where each collectible is located and pull it off with no mistakes. With that said, I feel as though Reactor Factory is very satisfying to optimize and learn, a true testament to Sonic R's satisfying learning curve. Also, that shortcut, with the ramp, just perfect. Radiant Emerald is the only unlockable level in the game and is by far the most linear. However, I feel there was a fun risk versus reward element to this level, and that would be the ring gates. While they may aid in saving time, CPUs can also take these shortcuts, and if they have more rings than you, this can give them a slight advantage, so you must plan these routes carefully. It is also home to the best song in the game, no contest. Each of these levels is something to make it stand out, make it memorable, and make it unlike any other race course in a video game. The tracks of Sonic R make up a great part of the game's identity, with how varied and memorable they are. And funnily enough, I feel this is greatly aided by one of the most controversial aspects of the game, the controls. If there's one thing you'll hear about Sonic R besides the music, it's that the controls are stiff, clunky, and not what you'd expect from a Sonic game. However, I feel as though people go about playing this game with the completely wrong mindset, which I don't even fully blame them for. Most people will take one look at Sonic R and assume it controls like, say, Sonic Adventure, when that simply isn't the case at all. The characters, despite being on foot, control like actual carts, most likely a remnant of that original Formula 1 prototype, and many people dislike this. The characters are heavy, stiff, and have some weird acceleration that takes some getting used to. However, I think it works incredibly well for this game, and I really can't imagine it playing much better with the fluent controls like many would expect it to have. Many of these tracks were designed with said controls in mind, having to jump at the perfect time and take tight corners to pull off specific shortcuts, and I think it all works in the game's favour. The biggest complaint most have with the controls, however, will be the turning. When most people play Sonic R, it seems as though they just forget one very important, crucial detail. They can drift. Have you ever seen an elderly relative play Mario Kart without realizing they can drift, do tricks, all of that? Yeah, that's what seeing most people play Sonic R is like. Not to sound condescending, but it honestly feels like a majority of people who play this game just ignore a very major gameplay mechanic, and then write off the game as having poor controls. Of course the controls aren't without their faults though. Trying to make short and precise movement is very unwieldy and difficult to pull off, especially if you're playing as a character of high acceleration. This is especially troublesome when collecting the Chaos Emeralds in Regal Ruin. But overall, I feel as though this game's controls work perfectly for the type of game this is and how the levels are designed. Due to this, the game has a very high skill ceiling with many tricks and shortcuts the player can pull off. Which then leads us to Sonic's band of bastards! Sonic R has 10 playable characters, all of which control drastically differently to one another, and have unique abilities, something that very few of the kart racers of the time had. The main man himself, Sonic, is about what you'd expect. He's fast, he has average mobility, but he is the most straightforward character in the game. He can double jump in this game, which is a nice ability to have, and it'll really save you at points. But overall, I feel you need to already be good at the game in order to really get much out of Sonic. Tails is a strange one. At first, some may think he's one of the weakest characters in the game with his slippery handling and being slightly slower than Sonic. However, if you can master his acceleration and flight ability, he might just be one of the best characters in the game with his high skill ceiling. There are a lot of skips he can do with Tails' flight, and I think it really makes him one of the more viable characters in the game. Knuckles is the meta character. He's usually favoured by speedrunners and is recommended for new players who want to learn the mechanics. This is due to his slightly slower speed, great handling, and amazing mobility due to his ability to glide. While he is a great character, and arguably the best in the game, I personally prefer seeing people play as the more weird and out there characters, which we're about to get into. Amy is another bizarre character, as she's one of the few who uses a vehicle rather than racing on foot. She's a character who I believe is far more viable when the game is set to snow compared to a regular player, as while her car can hover over water, she travels much faster over ice. Instead of being able to jump, Amy can use a boost every few seconds, which when used correctly can be very effective. She's one of the weakest characters in the game, but learning how to effectively play as her and manage those boosts is one of the most satisfying things to do in Sonic R. Robotnik is unlocked once Radiant Emerald is completed, and he is unique? Like Amy, he can't jump, but instead of using boosts, he shoots missiles at enemy players. Problem is, said missiles don't do a whole lot. They'll knock the other players back a little, but that's about it. If anything, I think the missiles actually help you by giving you a slight boost forward. He can traverse water at least, but that's about it. So overall, he's one of the hardest characters in the game to play as. Metal Sonic is similar to Tails, in that his handling is just as, if not more slippery. However, this can be taken advantage of by players who know what they're doing. He's very fast and can float on water for up to 4 seconds. But unfortunately, he doesn't have a special ability unlike all the previous characters. I wish I could say more about Metal, but sadly, he just doesn't have much going for him, with almost every other character in the game outdoing and overshadowing his abilities. Tails Doll. Tails Doll. Where do I begin? It's often said to be one of the weakest characters in the game, but honestly, I think it's pretty solid. It can't jump, but rather does a little hover, which isn't nearly as bad as it sounds, as it can hover over water at the cost of being one of the slowest characters in the game. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's address the biggest elephant in the room. What the internet did to this character. There's an ungodly amount of history which is shrouded in mystery, but to put it simply, starting in the 2000s, for whatever reason, Sonic fans began to create creepypastas and disturbing fan art depicting Tails Doll as a violent murderer. This became so popular to the point to where even the Archie Sonic comic would introduce Tails Doll as a character, strongly influenced by the creepypastas. It turns into a Lovecraftian demon. So yeah, I have a strong fondness for Tails Doll, both as a character in this game and for how the fan base influenced it. I may or may not have been genuinely terrified of this thing as a kid. Metal Knuckles is a really interesting one in that, like Tailsdoll, he was specifically created for this game, but unlike his haunted sibling, he kinda flew under the radar, and that's a shame. He has a really sick design and a lot of potential. Maybe someday we'll see him in the IDW comics, who knows. As for his gameplay in Sonic R, he plays very similarly to Knuckles, with the main differences being the ability to briefly float over water in a slightly different glide. I'm unsure if his speed and jump are any different, but overall, I'd say he's one of the best characters in the game, in my personal main. Egg Robo is, by all accounts, Sonic R's joke character. He can't jump and he can't float over water despite being, you know, an Egg Robo. But hey, you might have noticed that he has a gun! Well, fear not, because this deadly firearm of his is worse than Robotnik's missiles. Egg Robo is the only character in the game I would argue is simply not viable, but that's why I find him fun to play as. Choosing the game and trying to win races as the objective worst character is so incredibly entertaining, I'd really recommend giving it a try, it's very fun. Super Sonic is absolutely busted. There's no way around it, he is the most overpowered character in the game, essentially being Sonic as we know him, but probably on some illegal substance, as well as harnessing the power of Jesus Christ. The only downside is that due to his fast speed and slippery handling, it can sometimes get you into trouble. Now while he can make multiplayer the exact opposite of fun, Greg! In single player though, I think Super Sonic is a really neat reward for getting all the Chaos Emeralds, giving you an extremely broken character to explore all the levels to your heart's content. However, there is one small problem. If you play as any other character after unlocking him, you will be forced to race against Super Sonic, and his AI is challenging to say the least, so watch out. And that's every character. Traveler's Tales did a great job adding variety to the game, making all 10 playable characters feel unique and different to one another, and this greatly increases the replay value of Sonic R. I'd highly recommend playing through the game as each character. The way each of them controls allows you to play the game in a new, different way that feels fresh every time. As I'm sure most already know, Sonic R has a very unique soundtrack. The cheesy late 90s aura they give off has a very cozy and upbeat feel. I really couldn't imagine Sonic R without these songs, given how they're, without a doubt, the most memorable part of the game and a large part of its identity. This game just wouldn't feel the same and wouldn't be as fondly remembered by so many today if we'd received more traditional Sonic music, instead of the iconic vocals of T.J. Davis.